All right, rugby fans, welcome back. We're diving deep today, specifically curated for the fans, the ones who really live and breathe this sport. We got match reports, some pretty strong opinions, and even some whispers from the stands. So,
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for rugby with so much happening globally. Right now, we've got the Gallagher Premiership heating up in England. The United Rugby Championship is in full swing, and we've even got glimpses into what's going on in the French Top 14 and the Japan Rugby League One.
I feel like there's almost too much rugby to keep up with. But let's start with something that really shook things up in the Premiership. Bath completely destroying Saracens 68-10. That's not just a win, it's a statement.
Absolutely. And for anyone who might not know, the Gallagher Premiership is the top tier of English Rugby Union, kind of like their Premier League. But for rugby, and for Bath to just dominate Saracens, a team that's known for being so strong and so consistent by that kind of margin, well, it's definitely got people talking. It was actually Saracens' worst ever loss. They'd never been beaten that badly before, even worse than a 65-10 defeat back in 2023.
Okay, wow. So help me understand this. Was it just a fluke? Or are we seeing a real shift in power in the Premiership?
Well, it's definitely too early to say Bath's going to win it all, but this win definitely puts them in the conversation. It's how they won that's really interesting. Bath played with this level of attacking flair and precision we haven't really seen from them consistently. They were relentless, just going for tries, constantly pushing the pace and finding every weakness in Saracens' defense.
So it wasn't just Saracens having a bad day. Bath actually outplayed them.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting because there's this ongoing debate about how rugby is evolving. Some people think it's becoming too focused on running rugby and forgetting about the traditional set pieces. But Bath showed you can actually have both. They were so clinical in their set pieces. Their scrums and mauls were really effective at gaining territory and building momentum. But they also weren't afraid to spread the ball wide and use their backs to attack from anywhere on the field.
It's like that perfect blend of power and finesse, almost like a symphony of brute force and skill, all orchestrated by the coaches. Speaking of which, did Bath's coaching staff do anything specific in this match that stood out to you?
Yeah, actually, one thing that really caught my eye was how they used Ben Spencer at scrum half. He's known for his quick thinking and really accurate passing, and he was instrumental in controlling the pace of the game and finding space for his teammates.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you have Finn Russell at fly half, a truly creative player who can unlock defenses with his vision and passing skills. It's clear Bath's coaches had a plan to utilize these players' strengths, and it worked brilliantly.
So tactical brilliance on top of individual brilliance. No wonder Saracens were left struggling. But you mentioned earlier that this match has sparked a lot of debate about the style of rugby. What's that all about?
Well, some fans and commentators think that all this emphasis on running rugby is taking away from what made the game great. The physicality, the set-piece battles, the tactical kicking. They worry that rugby is becoming too much like a track meet, sacrificing the strategy and nuance for just speed and tries. But then on the other side, you have those who love this evolution. They see it as a natural progression towards a more entertaining and dynamic style of play. They argue that running rugby makes the game more exciting, with more tries, and a wider appeal to a global audience.
It's amazing how one match can create such passionate discussions about what rugby is really all about. But I think those different perspectives are part of what makes this sport so captivating. It's a debate that's happening not just in England, but all over the world.
Exactly. And it brings us to another point of contention that came up in the material. We looked at the impact of red and yellow cards, which were a big part of this. Bath versus Saracens match. Saracens' Toby Knight got a red card for contact to the head, and Liam Williams received a yellow card for denying a try-scoring opportunity.
Ah, yes, the constant debate about discipline in rugby. Those incidents always spark controversy. What are people saying about these specific calls?
As you can imagine, opinions are pretty divided. Some people believe the red card given tonight was a bit harsh, arguing that the contact wasn't intentional. Others are saying that player safety has to be the top priority, and any contact at the head, regardless of intent, needs to be punished severely. The yellow card on Williams seemed less controversial, though. Most people seem to agree he was deliberately preventing a try.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? You want to protect the players and make sure the game is fair, but no one wants to see a match decided by the referee.
Precisely. And this debate about red and yellow cards is relevant not just in the Premiership. It's happening in rugby leagues around the world. It raises some big questions about the balance between player safety, the flow of the game, and the role of the referee.
It's definitely another layer of complexity in a sport that already has a lot of them. But for all the debate it sparks, I think it also shows how rugby is always trying to improve and adapt to make sure the game is both exciting and safe.
And this whole idea of evolution and adaptation in rugby, it's not just about the rules or what happens on the field. One of the most interesting things I saw in the fan comments was a discussion about how different countries view the sport.
Oh, yeah. That's always a good topic for debate. What kind of differences are we talking about?
Well, one comment that really stuck with me was about how rugby is seen in what they called the Commonwealth world, places like England, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. They were saying that in those countries, rugby is often seen as a white-collar sport, something you play in school and maybe a bit afterwards, but then you go and get a proper job.
I can see that. It definitely has that amateur, gentlemanly image in some circles. But the commenter was contrasting that with how rugby is viewed in France, right?
Exactly. They were pointing out that French rugby is so much further ahead in terms of professionalism. It's not just a hobby, it's a career path. And that difference in perspective has a huge impact on how the game is played and developed.
So what are they doing differently in France? Give me the details.
Well, for one, the French Top 14, which is their premier rugby league, is incredibly competitive. The teams are well funded, the players are highly skilled, and the matches are intense. It's a real breeding ground for talent. And it attracts players from all over the world. They also have a big emphasis on youth development with academies and training programs that start nurturing young players from a really early age.
So they're really taking a much more long-term approach, investing in the future of the sport.
Exactly. And you can see that investment paying off. French clubs are consistently doing well in European competitions, and the French national team is a force to be reckoned with. They've really embraced rugby as a professional sport, and you can see that in the results.
That's a big contrast to the get proper job mentality we were talking about.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if those countries that see rugby more as a pastime are being left behind.
Yeah, it's a good question. The commenter even mentioned that globally there are only about 2,500 professional rugby jobs, and those are spread across just 6 leagues. So if you want to make a living playing rugby, you have to be among the best in the world.
Wow, that's a pretty small number considering how popular rugby is around the world.
It is, and it just shows how competitive professional rugby really is. These players aren't just athletes, they're artists, gladiators, and strategists all rolled into one. They need to be incredibly dedicated, both physically and mentally, to succeed at the highest level.
It's inspiring to see them pursuing their passion at that level, pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Definitely. And it absolutely. Just taking a quick look at the scores, Leinster is continuing their undefeated streak in the United Rugby Championship. They're looking really strong this season, like they're on a mission.
Leinster's always a tough team to beat. Their consistency and ability to adapt to whoever they're playing is remarkable.
It really is. And over in Scotland, the Edinburgh versus Glasgow game is living up to all the hype as a fierce rivalry. It's a close match. The atmosphere sounds electric. It's a great example of the passion and intensity that those local derbies bring to the sport.
Yeah, those rivalries, those battles for local bragging rights, they definitely add another level of excitement to rugby. But looking beyond specific matches, are there any bigger trends you're seeing in the global rugby scene?
One thing that really stands out is this increasing focus on tactical innovation. Teams are always looking for new ways to get an advantage, whether it's through creative attacking formations, unpredictable defense, or even finding ways to exploit certain rules. It's like the mental game is becoming just as important as the physical one.
So rugby is not just about brute strength anymore. It's a thinking person's game.
Absolutely. Rugby has always been about strategy and intelligence, but the level of sophistication is definitely increasing. Coaches are analyzing their opponents in so much detail, players are expected to understand complex game plans, and the margin for error is getting smaller and smaller.
It's like a giant chess match being played out on a rugby field with every move having huge consequences. Can you give me some examples of these tactical innovations? What are teams actually doing?
One example is the no-ruck tactic, which is being used more and more. It's where a team deliberately doesn't form a ruck after a tackle. It lets the attacking team keep the ball alive and try to exploit gaps in the defense. It's a risky tactic, but it can be really effective if you do it right.
Sounds pretty complicated. I bet it takes a lot of practice and communication to pull that off.
It does. And that's another trend. We're seeing this growing importance of communication and teamwork on the field. With the game getting faster and faster, players need to be able to make decisions in a split second and communicate effectively to make sure everyone's on the same page.
It's amazing to see how these tactical changes are influencing how rugby is played. But I'm guessing not everyone is thrilled about these changes. Are there people pushing back against this trend toward complexity?
Oh, definitely. There are some traditionalists who worry that all these new tactics are making the game too hard to understand for casual fans. They think rugby should be about simple, straightforward action. Big hits, powerful runs, skillful tries.
I can understand why some fans might feel that way.
Yeah.
But I think it also shows how dynamic rugby is as a sport. It's always evolving, adapting to new challenges, and embracing new ideas.
Exactly. And it's that constant evolution that keeps rugby so interesting. It's a sport that requires both physicality and intellect, creativity and discipline, and individual brilliance and teamwork.
There's something for everyone in rugby, whether you're a diehard fan analyzing every scrum and line-out, or someone who just enjoys the thrill of the game.
I completely agree. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from our deep dive today. Rugby is a sport with a rich history, an incredibly passionate global community, and a bright future. It's a sport that honors its traditions while always pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Beautifully put. And as we wrap up this deep dive into rugby union, I think it's important to bring it back to our listeners and how all of this can help them enjoy the game even more.
I think that's a great point. We've covered so much, from the specifics of individual matches to the bigger trends that are shaping rugby as a whole. But what does it all mean for the dedicated fans who are listening today?
Well, I think for me, it's just realizing that rugby is truly a global sport with so many different perspectives and approaches. We've seen how the professional side of things varies between countries, the ongoing debate about playing styles and how tactical innovations are always pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for fans who really follow rugby, this kind of knowledge is empowering. It lets them engage with the sport on a much deeper level, understand the little things about different leagues and styles of play, and appreciate the strategy behind everything that happens on the field.
It's like we've given them a behind-the-scenes look at the world of rugby. They can watch a match now and not just see the action, but understand the thinking behind every decision, how coaching philosophies impact the game, and how global trends play a role.
Exactly. Now they can analyze why Bath, using Ben Spencer and Finn Russell like they did, was so effective against Saracens, or how Leinster's discipline and adaptability has made them so dominant. They can appreciate the intensity of a local derby, like Edinburgh versus Glasgow, and understand what's driving the rise of professionalism in French rugby.
And maybe most importantly now, they can join in on the conversations that are shaping the future of the sport. They can debate running rugby versus the more traditional approach, talk about how rule changes affect the game, and even share their own ideas about how rugby can keep evolving.
It's all about appreciating just how complex and beautiful rugby is as a sport, and encouraging fans to be a part of its evolution.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into rugby union, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. We've explored the highs and lows, the tactical side of things, and the global perspectives. Now it's your turn to take all of this and apply it to how you understand the game.
Watch the upcoming matches with a more critical eye. Analyze what the players and coaches are doing, talk about it with your fellow fans, and most importantly, don't ever lose that passion for the sport.
Rugby is so much more than just a game. It's a community, a culture, a way of life. And as fans, we're lucky enough to be a part of its story.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep that rugby spirit alive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.